Have you ever felt like the more you understand people, the less you belong to them? It's strange, isn't it? The moment you start seeing through the masks, the small lies, the quiet fears, the subtle games, something changes. You don't hate the world for it, but you also can't unsee what you've seen. Suddenly, gatherings that used to feel warm start to feel hollow. Conversations that once excited you begin to sound rehearsed, predictable, mechanical. And you start wondering, is awareness a gift or a curse? Imagine sitting at a dinner table surrounded by friends, laughter echoing, stories flowing, yet inside, a quiet distance opens. You're present, smiling, nodding, but part of you is observing, watching how each person plays a role they've unconsciously accepted. You see the need to be liked, the fear of being rejected, the performance of confidence hiding deep uncertainty. And you realize you used to play the same part, until something inside you woke up. Carl Jung once wrote that, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But he also knew the hidden cost. Awakening separates you from the crowd. Because when you start asking real questions, when you stop following the script, society subtly exiles you. Not because it hates you, but because your presence disrupts its illusions. You remind people of truths they'd rather avoid. But here's the paradox. What feels like isolation is actually the first step toward authenticity. The path of self-awareness is not about superiority, it's about sincerity. It's about refusing to betray your own perception just to feel accepted. Jung called this the individuation process, the journey of integrating who you truly are beneath the masks you've worn. So if you've ever felt like an outsider, maybe it's not because you're broken. Maybe it's because you've begun to see clearly. And seeing clearly always carries a price. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, have you ever felt that strange loneliness that comes when you start to understand yourself too deeply? If yes, you might already be walking the very path Jung described. Like, subscribe, and stay with me, because this journey has only just begun. What if awareness didn't just open your eyes, but quietly rewrote the entire world around you? Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that nothing has really changed, yet everything looks different. The people, the conversations, the routines, all still there. But suddenly, you can see through them. The charm of surface-level happiness fades, and what remains is the quiet hum of anxiety, insecurity, and fear that hides beneath everyday life. It's unsettling, isn't it? Because once you begin to perceive the unconscious patterns driving human behavior, you can't return to innocence. The laughter at the office sounds a little strained. The compliments start to feel like negotiations. Even your own ambitions begin to lose their shine. And you start asking, if everything I used to chase was just a story I told myself, then who am I without it? Carl Jung believed that becoming conscious means confronting the shadow, the collection of everything we deny, suppress, or refuse to see. Most people never do it. They prefer comfort over truth, illusion over awakening. And honestly, who could blame them? Awareness isn't peaceful at first, it's disruptive. It shakes the foundation of who you thought you were. It strips away the safety of ignorance and demands that you meet yourself fully and without excuses. But what if, instead of seeing this as loss, you saw it as liberation? What if awareness is not about losing your place in the world, but about finding your true position within it? Imagine living with eyes wide open, seeing the same world, but from a deeper vantage point. You begin to notice beauty in honesty, meaning in silence, and strength in solitude. Awareness doesn't isolate you, it refines your relationships. You stop craving approval because you no longer depend on it to feel real. So here's the invitation. Don't fear the distance that consciousness creates. Let it teach you discernment. Let it purify your connections until only what is real remains. Jung once said, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." But he might have added, "There is also no greater peace than living awake." The question is, are you willing to pay the price of seeing clearly? Most people think that becoming more conscious means feeling more peaceful. But here's the truth Jung hinted at. The beginning of awakening often feels like disorientation, not serenity. You start seeing through the social scripts, realizing how much of what we call normal is just a collective dream. And that realization doesn't make you feel enlightened. It makes you feel alienated. You look around and wonder how you ever believed in the same illusions everyone else still defends. The small talk that used to fill your evenings now feels exhausting. The goals you once chased, money, recognition, admiration, start to lose their emotional pull. And this shift can be terrifying. Because even though you've outgrown the old ways of being, you haven't yet built new ones. You're between worlds, no longer asleep, but not yet free. This is what Jung meant when he said that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Real awareness is not soft light. It's fire. It burns through pretense, through comforting lies, through everything that once gave you a false sense of identity. It exposes your contradictions and your fragility, and that can make you want to turn back. But the moment of rupture, the discomfort of seeing through the illusion, is sacred. It's the threshold between the false self and the authentic one. The old identity has to die before the new one can breathe. Jung called this the death of the persona, the collapse of the mask you wore to survive. And when that mask falls, you might feel lost. But what's really happening is that you're becoming real. So if you felt disconnected, uncertain, or even a little broken after waking up to deeper awareness, know that you're not failing. You're transforming. The path of consciousness isn't about escaping the darkness. It's about walking through it with your eyes open. Ask yourself, what illusions are you still clinging to, just to avoid feeling alone in your own awakening? Because the moment you dare to let them go, that's when true freedom begins to whisper your name. Carl Jung was not the first to notice that awareness isolates. From Socrates to Nietzsche, the story repeats itself. The one who sees differently often walks alone. Jung's voice, however, gave psychological depth to this ancient truth. He showed that isolation is not a punishment. It's a natural consequence of awakening. Once you stop living through borrowed values, you begin to live from within. And few people understand that kind of freedom. Jung's concept of individuation describes this process. It is the lifelong work of becoming your authentic self, a self not molded by parents, society, or ideology, but discovered through inner confrontation. It's not about becoming perfect, it's about becoming whole. To individuate is to recognize that the light and the shadow both belong to you, and that recognition changes how you see everything. Think of Plato's allegory of the cave. The one who leaves the cave to see the sunlight cannot return to the darkness without feeling out of place. The problem is, most people are still inside, believing the shadows on the wall are reality. When you come back and tell them otherwise, they don't thank you. They resist you. Not because they're evil, but because truth threatens the stability of their illusions. Jung understood this deeply. Consciousness doesn't make you superior. It makes you responsible. This is why awakening feels lonely. The more you see, the less you can participate in certain games. You no longer fit comfortably into systems built on unconsciousness, be it relationships based on pretense or jobs that demand self-betrayal. You begin to crave honesty more than harmony, depth more than comfort, solitude more than social validation. That's not arrogance, it's maturity. And here's the paradox. As you evolve inwardly, you may appear outwardly distant. Yet what's truly happening is intimacy on another level. You start to see people as they are, not as you wish them to be. You listen beyond their words. You feel compassion instead of judgment. Awareness makes you both more separate and more connected at the same time. So when you feel like an outsider, remember, you are not drifting away from humanity. You are simply meeting it from a higher clarity. And that, as Jung and the philosophers before him taught, is the beginning of true belonging. There's something paradoxical about how we chase belonging. We crave connection more than almost anything else, yet most of what we call connection is built on mutual blindness. We agree not to see each other too clearly. We mirror back each other's acceptable selves, the parts that fit. It's a quiet social contract. I won't expose your discomfort if you don't expose mine. But when you start waking up, you unknowingly break that contract. You begin to see the emotional undercurrents behind people's words, the subtle manipulation inside politeness, the loneliness hiding behind confidence. Suddenly, you can no longer participate in the game of pretending, not because you want to rebel, but because you can't lie to yourself anymore. And that's when the distance begins to grow. Jung called this tension between individuality and belonging one of the core human struggles. The unconscious wants to merge, to feel safe within the collective. The conscious self, however, strives to differentiate, to become real, unique, whole. When you move toward consciousness, you're moving away from the comfort of imitation. And that movement is painful because it threatens one of our deepest biological needs, acceptance. You start noticing invisible patterns, how people bond through shared complaints instead of shared growth, how social groups unconsciously reward conformity and punish authenticity. Even in love, you might see how much of what passes for intimacy is really emotional projection, each person loving the image they've created of the other. Seeing this can make you feel detached, even cynical. But cynicism isn't the goal. Clarity is. Because only through clarity can love become real. The irony is that true belonging only emerges when you no longer need it to fill your emptiness. When you stop performing to be accepted, you attract people who resonate with your essence, not your persona. It's a smaller circle, but a truer one. You no longer fit everywhere, but where you do fit, you belong completely. So the next time you feel disconnected, ask yourself, is it loneliness, or is it freedom growing inside you? Because maybe what feels like exile is just your soul learning the difference between fitting in and being seen. There's a moment in every inner journey when words begin to fail. The things that once seemed simple, success, happiness, love, become layered, complex, even paradoxical. You realize how much of your old language was built to describe illusions. That's why, when you start to wake up, it becomes harder to communicate. You're not just speaking differently, you're thinking from another depth. This is why people often misinterpret those who are becoming conscious. Your silence might be read as arrogance. Your clarity might be mistaken for coldness. But in truth, you're just learning a new language, the language of awareness. It doesn't thrive on noise, performance, or reaction. It speaks through presence, through the spaces between words, through the quiet recognition of what is real. Jung once said, "The greater the light, the darker the shadow." When you start to awaken, you don't just see beauty more vividly, you also see pain more honestly. You become sensitive to the falseness in yourself and others, and that sensitivity can feel like a burden. But that burden is also your compass. It points you toward authenticity, toward what's alive. So much of our culture teaches us to numb out, to avoid discomfort, to label every silence as awkward, every tear as weakness. Yet awareness redefines these experiences. What if silence is not absence but depth? What if sadness is not failure, but a message from the soul that something real has been neglected? When you stop fighting your own inner experience, consciousness starts speaking clearly, and you realize that every emotion, even pain, is sacred data. Here's a phrase to remember. Awareness is not about feeling better. It's about feeling more real. Because the goal of consciousness isn't to escape life, it's to inhabit it fully, to feel the texture of existence without anesthesia, to meet the world without filters even when it hurts. If this resonates, it's because you already understand the secret Jung was pointing to. Awakening isn't the end of suffering, it's the end of pretending. So ask yourself, what truth are you finally ready to stop avoiding? Here's the strange irony of consciousness. The more awake you become, the more alone you feel, until you realize that this loneliness is the doorway to genuine connection. At first, awareness separates you. You see patterns others don't, and conversations that once felt alive now sound shallow. You sense how much of human interaction is built on mutual avoidance of truth. It hurts. You start to wonder if growth means losing everyone. But slowly, something unexpected happens. That same clarity that once isolated you begins to deepen your empathy. You stop reacting to people's masks and start seeing the pain beneath them. You realize that the very blindness that frustrated you is also what makes people human. Instead of judging, you start to understand. Instead of withdrawing, you begin to listen differently. to listen without needing to fix or control. Awareness, paradoxically, brings you back to compassion. Jung often spoke about holding the tension of opposites. He believed that wholeness emerges not from choosing one side, but from embracing both: the light and the dark, the self and the collective, solitude and relationship. The conscious person learns to live in paradox. You can be detached, yet loving, alone, yet deeply connected. It's not about balance, it's about integration. Think of it like this. Before awakening, connection feels like merging. You lose yourself in others to escape loneliness. After awakening, connection feels like resonance. You meet others without dissolving into them. You no longer need to be understood by everyone. You just need to remain true to yourself. And that authenticity creates a different kind of bond, one rooted in honesty, not illusion. So maybe the goal isn't to escape isolation, but to transform it. To turn solitude into intimacy with life itself. To discover that the space between you and others isn't empty, it's sacred. It's where love matures beyond need, where compassion replaces dependency. Ask yourself, can you hold the paradox of being both deeply alone and deeply connected at the same time? Because that's where Jung's path truly leads. Not to comfort, but to wholeness. And once you learn to live inside that tension, you realize the outsider isn't exiled from humanity. The outsider is simply the one who has learned to see it clearly. At some point, after the confusion, the loss, and the silence, something subtle begins to shift. You stop yearning to be understood. You stop trying to convince anyone of what you see. And without even realizing it, peace enters quietly, unannounced, undeserved, yet deeply earned. That's the hidden reward of walking alone. The moment you stop resisting your solitude, it transforms into serenity. True consciousness doesn't grant superiority, it grants stillness. You begin to see that not everything needs to be fixed, explained, or shared. Awareness simplifies you. You start wanting less, not out of resignation, but out of clarity. What matters becomes few but sacred. Honesty, depth, presence, meaning. The rest begins to fall away naturally, like leaves in autumn. Jung believed that the path of individuation leads a person back to the self, the center that connects all opposites within us. The more you align with that inner axis, the less you depend on external validation. You no longer need to belong everywhere because you finally belong to yourself. And that inner belonging radiates outward. It changes how you move through the world. People feel it, even if they can't name it. You're no longer performing, you're simply being. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. Challenges remain, emotions still surge, shadows still whisper. But something fundamental has changed. You no longer fear those moments. You face them with a quiet strength because you've met yourself in the dark before. And once you've done that, nothing external can truly shake your core. Imagine waking up in the morning with no need to prove or pretend. You breathe, and it's enough. You meet others without the hunger for approval. You can love freely because you no longer need love to complete you. That's the quiet power of awakening. It returns you to simplicity, to truth, to peace. So yes, the path of consciousness may turn you into an outsider. But the reward is this. You trade belonging for authenticity, and in doing so, you find a deeper, more enduring kind of connection, the one between your soul and life itself. Can you feel it? That stillness that waits beneath the noise? That's not emptiness. That's freedom remembering its own name. Every journey of awakening follows a kind of invisible architecture, a structure that guides you even when you think you're lost. Jung saw this not as a random unfolding, but as a psychological law of development. He called it the individuation process, and though the term sounds abstract, it's deeply human. It's the gradual movement from unconsciousness to wholeness, from imitation to authenticity. The first stage begins with disillusionment, the collapse of everything false. It feels like chaos, but it's actually cleansing. Your mind begins to question inherited beliefs, values, and identities. You see that much of what you called me was borrowed. Then comes the second stage, confrontation with the shadow. Here you face the parts of yourself you've denied, your envy, your fears, your hidden desires. It's painful, but it's also where your vitality hides. What you repress owns you. What you integrate empowers you. Next is differentiation. When you begin to live by your own inner compass, you no longer need others to define what is right for you. This independence can look like rebellion, but it's actually alignment. You start choosing relationships, work, and habits that resonate with your truth instead of your conditioning. And finally, there's integration. The moment you realize that light and shadow are not enemies, but partners. Awareness doesn't erase duality. It reconciles it. You become both grounded and expansive, rational and intuitive, human and divine. Throughout history, this same structure has appeared in philosophy, mythology, and art. From Buddha's awakening beneath the tree, to Dante's descent into the inferno, to Nietzsche's idea of the Übermensch, all tell the same story. The self must first fall apart before it becomes whole. Jung simply gave psychological language to this timeless transformation. Understanding this pattern changes everything. You stop seeing pain as punishment and start seeing it as part of the architecture. You realize that your isolation, confusion, and struggle are not detours. They're essential corridors leading toward consciousness. Awareness isn't an escape from suffering. It's the art of suffering meaningfully. So when you find yourself in the middle of your chaos, remember, you're not lost. You're being restructured. Consciousness is building you from the inside out. Ask yourself now, where are you in this architecture of awareness? Because once you name the stage, you can walk it with intention instead of fear. If you've made it this far, you already know. Awakening is not a comfortable story. It strips you bare. It separates you. It challenges everything you once called home. But there's something sacred in that exile. Because once you stop belonging everywhere, you start belonging somewhere real. You belong to truth, to authenticity, to life as it actually is, not as the world pretends it to be. Jung understood that consciousness is both a wound and a blessing. It makes you feel the weight of existence more sharply, but it also allows you to live with greater depth, compassion, and meaning. The outsider sees the world without the comforting veil of denial. Yet that same clarity gives birth to wisdom, creativity, and love that isn't naive. You stop chasing happiness as a distraction and start cultivating peace as a state of being. Being an outsider doesn't mean being disconnected. It means you've stopped confusing acceptance with alignment. You no longer adapt yourself to fit others' illusions. Instead, you invite others to meet you in reality. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. But either way, you stay true. That's the quiet courage of consciousness, the ability to stand alone without closing your heart. And perhaps that's the real meaning of Jung's insight. True consciousness doesn't make you superior to others. It makes you responsible for them. You see their pain because you've met your own. You can hold their darkness without judgment because you've held your own with honesty. The awakened outsider becomes paradoxically the most connected of all, because they no longer love selectively. They love from truth. So if you ever feel like you don't fit in, remember, that disconnection might be the universe's way of initiating you into a deeper belonging, the belonging of the soul. The world needs eyes that see clearly, hearts that stay open, and minds brave enough to walk alone. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt this tension between truth and belonging? If these words resonated with you, leave a like, subscribe, and share this with someone who might be waking up too. Because in a world asleep, even one conscious heart can remind others to open their eyes. And maybe that's the ultimate gift of the outsider. Not to escape the world, but to illuminate it, quietly, courageously, and without regret.